justice for all.
Now please be seated. There's a little piece of history associated with it. There's more than one piece with the Pledge of Allegiance, written by a Baptist minister. And the original pledge from the 1890s was, I pledge allegiance to the flag. You can understand why they got rid of that in World War II, right? So this is the official sign. It's like, oh my goodness, when I read that I couldn't believe it. I'm going to introduce Carol Plouffe, who is our co-vice president and our program director. Carol, can you introduce our speaker?
Tonight's speaker is Matt Ganster, and his topic is Jonathan Sheldon, the Fighting Quaker. So please sit back and relax and enjoy.
I'm sure you can hear me. Well, thanks for the introduction, Carol. So my talk is Jonathan Sheldon, the Fighting Quaker. And it's based on an essay that was published in the New York Knickerbocker Press in 1929. And a little spoiler, Jonathan Sheldon actually did not enlist or fight. But I will share the harrowing story of how he earned that moniker. And just a little aside, when we moved to Duanesburg, and my wife and I became the stewards of the Sheldon farmhouse, the National Register listed farmhouse, I actually heard mention of Jonathan Sheldon and his title, Fighting Quaker, and I sort of made the assumption that he was a fighting Quaker. But in fact, when I started to research it more, I learned how unique a story he really is. Because not even during the Revolution was it common or expected at all for Quakers to participate in the war effort at all. So, just a little context. This is the Sheldon farmhouse, our house. It's on Route 7, about 3.5 miles west of Quaker Street. We've been there since 2013. And if you haven't met us in that time, there's a very good chance that you knew the previous owners, the lovely family, the Munsons, who lived there for 50 years before we did. This was an article in the Schenectady Gazette written by Lansing Christman about their purchase of the farm. So I'm just going to read you the description there. 170 years old, one of the Sheldon family farms, this home in Duanesburg, built in the late 1700s, has recently changed ownership. Mr. and Mrs. Paul Munson of Albany have purchased the home through Wendell C. Wilbur, Delancey Realtor, and one of the founders of this historical society. And once owned by the late George R. Lunn, a former Schenectady mayor and the state lieutenant governor, the house on Route 7 contains 4 fireplaces, 1 in the cellar and 3 throughout, believed to have been built by a member of the Cooper family of Cooperstown, who's the mason. The brick in the living room fireplace was ballast in a ship from Holland. That particular detail is actually doubtful based on architectural history and the fact that it was a fairly common romantic myth in the late 19th century to attribute what were probably actual handmade square 8x8 hearth bricks to ballast. For this article, Mr. Christman was able to interview Merle Sheldon Horow, who was the last Sheldon to be born in the house. Her parents were the last to farm it actively. They were Emma and Kingsley Sheldon, and as I actually spoke about here a few years ago, they were tragically killed in a car accident. The railroad crossing in Central Bridge. So that was 1918 was about the last time that the land was actually farmed. A little more context. This is just a sheet from the research that was done from 1979 to 84 when the property was listed on the National Register. This is a pretty good summary of what the Library of Congress has. Gives a cursory description of the buildings, some details, farmstead itself. But 2 points that I'd like to make with this slide, and so you don't have to squint. I'm going to read the last 2 paragraphs. The 2 points that I'd like to make is, one, that the deed records I'm finding rarely tell the whole story of a property or its history, obviously. And number 2, although this presentation is about the Sheldon family, and Jonathan Sheldon in particular, researching any family, any early farm family in Duanesburg, you find just how inextricably linked they are with the surrounding families. So, by researching the Sheldons, it's very interesting how much I've learned about the Wing family, the Hoyt family, the Gages to some extent. And they were really not just a tight-knit community of neighbors, but these families intermarried. They became big extended families. The farmhouse is also significant for its association with the Benjamin Wing family, one of Duanesburg's earliest and most prominent Quaker families. In addition to being early settlers of Quaker Street, the members of the Wing family also established large farmsteads throughout the southwest area of the town. The Sheldon farmhouse is one of the earliest extant structures associated with the Wing family in Duanesburg. The farmhouse was purchased from the Wing family by Martin Hoyt in 1839. In 1866, Hoyt sold the property to Benjamin Sheldon. So I bring this up because it kind of runs counter to the Sheldon family lore that the farm was in one family from about 1797 to when Mrs. Merle Sheldon Horoho sold it in 1937, which would have been 140 years of continuous ownership. So what I'm finding is that the Wings did develop a number of large farmsteads, great lots, usually, in that part of Duanesburg, around Route 30, toward the western end of Route 7 within the town. But development often meant some of the more arduous tasks, which was clearing some of the biggest trees, in some cases building a barn, even a temporary dwelling before the family who took ownership had saved enough to build a large frame house. So it seems likely to me, although I have no definite proof, that the Wings could have held a mortgage against the Sheldons. The Sheldons could have leased for some amount of time. I'm also finding that one of the older daughters of Jonathan Sheldon and Eliza Ann Sheldon married one of the Wings shortly after they got to town. So it's a little hard to pin down some of those details, but just to address them. I have looked at the Schenectady County Clerk's records back to Martin Hoyt, but then of course Schenectady County stops at 1809, and when a lot of this happened that I'll be talking about, we were part of Albany County, and my visits to the Albany County Clerk have, when I learned that most of those records, all those records pertaining to our farm at least, were probably destroyed in fires or floods over the 200 years that they were stored in various buildings there. The back one, this is the 1850 census, where it lists Martin Hoyt as the proprietor of the farm. Martin and Ann Hoyt were in their late 50s at the time. This would have been right after the deaths of both Jonathan Sheldon and his wife Eliza Ann. But also listed as a resident is a Sarah Sheldon. So, go figure. These are not clear-cut issues. So, also, maybe of interest on here, the estimated value of the farm is $6,000, which in today's dollars would be about $250,000. And in contrast to the preceding page, the following page, that's double and triple about what any other farm nearby would have been. So, and then, by the time the Fagan map of 1866 was published, we have Benjamin Sheldon as the proprietor. The census records show that he was a farmer, but also lists manufacturing as his occupation. And Mark Weinheimer and Becky Watrous are here, but when they presented on Martin Hoyt Ball, I know that Benjamin Sheldon was a frequently appeared in Martin Ball's writings. So I assume those would shed some light on what kind of manufacturing Benjamin Sheldon was engaged in. And there it is, Great Lot 389. So, right. So, with that context squared away, we're on to the man of the hour, who's Jonathan Sheldon. He was born in Middletown, Rhode Island, 1757, descended from a line of English Sheldons who immigrated in 1629. This is his headstone in the Friends Burying Ground, Quaker Street. It is not his original headstone. Here's the application to the Sons of the American Revolution to replace the original marker with this one that honored his service, which is kind of briefly described in that paragraph on his captivity at sea. But that's hardly the whole story. So, I'm going to start reading a few excerpts from the essay. And we'll get to one of the most personally interesting details for me. So Jonathan Sheldon was the son of Jonathan and Mary Tyler Sheldon. He was born in Middletown, Rhode Island, January 23rd, 1757, a posthumous son, his father having died at sea. When about 14, he was apprenticed to a cabinet maker in Newport. So, after sentence 2, that's where I'm going to pause for a little bit, because my perspective on this, so I was trained as an architect for the last decade. I've made my living as a finished carpenter and cabinet maker. So, I stopped there. I was, well, okay, I need some more detail on this cabinet making apprenticeship. As much as I've researched the farm and appreciate that amount of history, this is a personal connection that I wasn't aware of until about a year and a half ago when I obtained the full text of this essay. So it was not hard to find information about his apprenticeship, because it's actually pretty well documented at the Smithsonian Institute American History Museum. Believe it or not. So I will read their description of what this suit is in these pictures. So the Smithsonian describes it as a cotton nankeen suit. It's kind of a yellowish cream cotton. Originally was imported from China, but by the 1770s there were makers of it in the colonies. This suit was given to Jonathan Sheldon in 1775 upon the completion of his apprenticeship to John Townsend in Newport, Rhode Island. The promise of a freedom suit at the end of an apprenticeship was part of a standard contract between pupil and master in the 18th century, and would have been the young man's best clothing as he set out into the world. While a simple suit like this would have been very common at the time, this is the only one of its kind that is known to have survived. Family tradition states that the cabinet maker's wife made Sheldon's suit using applewood button forms that were made in the shop. So there are descriptions, there are illustrations of freedom suits awarded to people at the end of a skilled trade apprenticeship. But I just want to emphasize, remarkably, there is one that survives. And it was almost certainly stored in a chest or a closet right here in Duanesburg for about 120 years. Because Daughters of the American Revolution donated it to the Smithsonian. And fortunately, it's been preserved in storage ever since. So, another little bit of detail about this apprenticeship. So it was a 4-year apprenticeship, which is no small task for anyone. But we hear cabinet maker, we think maybe kitchen cabinets, we think something along the lines of this podium. But what were they building in John Townsend's shop? Well, it was nothing like that, actually. John Townsend was probably one of the 2 most prestigious cabinet makers in the colonies. The other would be John Goddard, who was also in Newport, Rhode Island, also a Quaker, and intermarried through the generations with the Townsends. So it was almost one family that dominated the fine furniture industry of that era. They built these chests and highboys, and they worked primarily in the Chippendale, Queen Anne style. They worked with exotic mahogany flitches that they imported from around the world. They sourced maple and walnut burls from also, around the Northeast, from wherever they could get them, really. And it seemed like, from what I've read, cost was almost no object in there. So these pieces, along with a couple dozen others, are stored at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where they rotate the displays. There's also a dedicated museum to John Townsend's work in Newport, and occasionally they do come up for sale. So one of the last pieces was in 2012. It was a document chest, pretty similar to the one on the right, came up at Christie's in 2012. It sold for $3,442,500. So, if you see something like this, at a garage sale, maybe with a Townsend mark on the back, pay to pick it up. So toward the end of poor Jonathan Sheldon's apprenticeship, his mother passed away after a brief illness. So before even reaching adulthood, he was without parents. He was pretty much on his own, it sounded like. War was breaking out. This was 1775, toward the end of 1775. So war was breaking out. Things were chaotic, to say the least, and perhaps the demand for ultra-fine furniture was waning temporarily, too. So I'll continue with Major Wells' essay. Jonathan then made up his mind to no longer resist the lure of the sea, and entered the merchant marine of the colonies, which at the time was being greatly harassed by the British. Within a year or before, he had attained his majority. He had won the command of a small sloop named Tyrol, as attested by the state records of Providence, which contain the following entry. Jonathan Sheldon, master of the sloop Tyrol, 250 tons, supplies, sailed, bond signed February 17, 1776, by John Cook. So, give you an example of what a merchant sloop at the time might have looked like. This was an illustration of a privateer brig capturing a merchant sloop. So, actually, it was an American brig capturing a British merchant sloop. So, picture the flag reversed. Jonathan Sheldon would have been in this. So that's approximately what a 250-ton loaded sloop looked like at the time. It was not the Edmund Fitzgerald. So the Revolutionary War was being fought at this time, and Captain Sheldon, who, although in command of a merchantman and not a combatant at heart, flew the flag of the rebellious colonies and was considered a combatant. His vessel was overhauled on the high seas and captured by a British man of war. Captain Sheldon and his crew were imprisoned and lodged aboard the prison ship Rhode Island. On August 6, 1777, he was exchanged for British prisoners and taken to Boston in the schooner Speedwell by Captain Josiah Godfrey of that city. So that is his official capture and documentation of release. Now, his descendants kept his log. They didn't only preserve his suit, but they had his captain's log. And Major Well, who wrote this essay in several ways, seems to kind of frustratedly describe his log as laconic. So he stuck to the facts. He didn't embellish much. But fortunately, thanks to especially these two descendants, an oral history was passed down. And also, sticking to the facts there, in his log, there were two other entries that would describe his capture and imprisonment. So over his 7 or 8 year career at sea, he was probably arrested and imprisoned at least 3 times. And there's a little bit of doubt about a potential 4th time, too. So to say that he was courageous to keep at it is putting it mildly. So one of those stories I will share in the words of Mrs. Lizzie Ann Fisher. She was a resident of Quaker Street in 1929, 73 years old. And she shares that as a child, she used to hear her father, Captain Sheldon's son, talk about the depths of suffering visited upon the unfortunate prisoners of war. Quote, while at Mill Prison in England, Mrs. Fisher says, conditions were particularly bad. The prisoners had neither food nor drink and lived in the worst possible filth. Many of the prisoners went mad because of their suffering, but were not even removed to other quarters. One day, a party of English gentlemen were passing the prison, wherein a large cell Captain Sheldon and his men were confined. A small dog accompanied the party, but when they departed, they left the dog behind. Left it behind not intentionally, but because the dog could not be found. In vain did the master whistle for him. It had disappeared and could not be found. That is, until the party had gone. Then pieces of raw dog were passed around among the prisoners, who gnawed at the unwholesome flesh until the last shred had gone. But life was prolonged because of the visit of the dog. A short time later, a number of prisoners were exchanged for a similar number of English sailors, else all of them would have perished. Upon his release from confinement, Captain Sheldon called at the house of a friend and asked for help. The elderly woman gave him water with which to bathe, the first bath in many months, and while he was performing his ablutions, she placed his tattered clothing in an outdoor cauldron to kill the lice and other vermin which infested his garments. So this is 1783 already. Keep in mind he went to sea in February of 1776, so that was probably felt like even more years than it was. So upon returning to Rhode Island, he meets Eliza Ann Ryder, who is a descendant of prominent Rhode Islanders. As well, 3 of the 4 colonial governors of Providence Plantation of Rhode Island were her ancestors. Her grandfather at the time owned Common Fence Farm, which was one of the largest estates outside of Newport. And they were married in January of 1784. So that would imply, probably, that she was fairly well-to-do. They moved to Dutchess County shortly after that. And within a year or two, according to the records of where their children were born, they made it to Duanesburg. That would have been based on the family trees and the dates of birth between 1797 and 1800. During the rest of that time, they had 10 children together. 8 survived to adulthood. Jonathan Sheldon was one of the 6 trustees listed in 1825 on a deed that gave land to the current meeting house and cemetery. They built up their farm. Their descendants built up the farm by 1866. The image of Benjamin Sheldon that we saw, they were cultivating at least 300 acres. They harvested buckwheat and rye. Hay was one of their main crops, and one of the main markets for that hay was the Erie Canal Company, which fed the hay to the mules who pulled the barges. So, good grass-growing soil worked out very well for them. So, in this time, there are also descriptions of Jonathan Sheldon's kindliness, his gentility, his embodiment of Quaker integrity, his peaceful demeanor. A great life, it appears. Of course, the one detail that I'm a little hung up on still is I'm curious how he utilized his fine pedigree after his apprenticeship in this furniture shop. So, if you'll indulge me for a moment here, I'm going to launch into a little history of some architectural details in order to propose a hypothesis to you all. So, a couple of drawings here from 2 books that I found very helpful in dating old buildings and understanding old buildings. I'm going to read a quote from the author of the first book, which is a little bit covered up. It's called A Building History of Northern New England. Extremely helpful book on building processes and materials. And he describes a stylistic shift that was happening right about this time in history. So one of the most subtle yet revolutionary characteristics of the Federal style was the transformation of the molding profiles used in New England houses. Throughout the Georgian period, all molding profiles had been based on Roman precedent. They were composed of segments of circles. Thus, for example, a Roman ogee molding is composed of two connected arcs that together form an S-curve. This. A Roman ovolo is a quarter of a circle. Unlike the Roman molding, the Grecian molding is based on conic sections. So, if moldings are made up of parts of an ellipse or a parabola, they are then in the Grecian taste. So, from the Georgian period to before, most architectural details like this had been interpreted through a Renaissance lens, which was heavily Roman influenced. And toward the mid to late 18th century, one of the factors that led to this change were archaeological digs that were happening that exposed more people directly to Greek details. So these details within the early Federalist style, and which led to Greek revival, of course, were described and even promoted by the English architect John Adam at the time, but that probably didn't leave academic or gentlemanly circles very much. The main promulgator of these details was an author and carpenter named Asher Benjamin, whose American Builder's Companion was first published in 1811 and was widely distributed. And anyone who wanted the most fashionable place at the time would probably seek out someone who was an adherent to Asher Benjamin's practices. So, getting to my point here, here's a collection of details from inside the Sheldon farmhouse. And what I want to point out is that every molding in the house, every mantle detail, every door casing, every chair rail is elliptical and parabolic in nature. So, assuming, as we are, based on the documentation we have, that the house was built at some point after 1795, and I would say based on a preponderance of evidence before 1810, based on its structural type, its chimney design, family and community history. If it were built in that era, so keep in mind, Asher Benjamin, published in 1811, this house built almost certainly before 1810. It is remarkably fashion-forward for its time. It almost would have been unheard of in especially a rural area to see this collection of details all throughout the house, not just the main rooms. So what alternative explanations could there be? House could be newer. Well, I think it's pretty unlikely, and it's well enough documented. I would add, too, that the Sheldon farmhouse is what's called a plank-on-frame house, which is the same way that the Quaker Meeting House was built, and actually another house just a few doors down from the Quaker Meeting House, which was a pretty unusual technique at the time. It existed in western Vermont and eastern New York up till about 1820, commonly. Kim, I don't know if you could comment on that a little bit.
I don't have enough history there to comment.
Well, fortunately, the author of probably the main book on plank-on-frame houses, Jan Lewandowski, stopped by our house about 10 years ago. And so, and that
Who's the
was,
expert?
yeah. So, anyway, so it was probably built then. Another explanation could be that the house was extensively remodeled at some point. But I would point out, too, that every one of these moldings certainly would have been produced and installed before any industrial production of them was happening. So if you catch the light just right in any room on any of these moldings, you can see the telltale marks of the hand planes that cut them. And that was almost certainly done on site. And it's really kind of hard to emphasize the significance of that too, because to cut all those moldings, you would have needed, at least a mid-sized chest of molding planes that were ground to those profiles, or at least close to them. And those probably would have been made in England or one of the higher-end shops in New England, and not widely available locally for sure. So my hypothesis, though, is that someone with a particularly worldly awareness of fine woodwork of the time had a hand in building it or directing the building of it. And that is where Jonathan Sheldon comes in. So it's a little detail that I wanted to be sure to add myself to this presentation of his life. So then we make our way to the last will and testament of Jonathan Sheldon. A number of these documents, too, I will say, I was able to obtain through the Sheldon Family Foundation, which is, they were formed in 1937. Now they're online, they're worldwide, and they're one of the most accessible and well-organized genealogical organizations I've ever come across. And if everyone's family had an association like this, I think our global awareness of history would be probably quite a bit greater. So I know it's impossible to squint and read that here, but I've spent enough time doing that at home, so I'm going to read to you a few excerpts from the will. I'll add, too, that it was November of 1849 that Jonathan Sheldon passed away. So that was about 2 months shy of his 93rd birthday. He says, I give and bequeath unto my dear wife, Eliza Ann, in dower $800, the least of which she is to have during her widowhood. So $800 in today's money would be about $23,000. She passed away in April of 1850, so less than 6 months after he did. And, their marriage was 65 years long. It's described by all of their descendants as about as blissful as it gets. She is also to have all my household furniture to use during her life. There is one exception I shall make concerning the household furniture. That is, my son James is to have my cherry desk and dining table immediately after my death. So, of course, I'd like to know if that cherry desk and dining table still exist and where they are, if so.
I don't have it.
Too bad. It also lists that he holds a mortgage against his son James, and based on the 1850 map, I'm almost certain which farm that would be. It's close to the intersection of Sheldon Road and Route 7, which I'm told for years was referred to as Sheldon's Four Corners because of how many Sheldons lived there. So. Then I'd like to leave you with one more quote from Major Wells' essay, is passed down from his descendants. Long years after he had retired from the sea, and when he was living in Quaker Street on stormy nights, the old sailor would arise from his comfortable bed and pace the floor of his home to express his sorrow and sympathy for the sailors who were at sea, whom he knew from experience must be suffering and in grave danger. So, let's see if you have any questions. Do my best to answer questions or corrections.
Did he pass away here in Duanesburg?
Yes. So he and Eliza Ann are married behind the meeting house.
Earlier on you mentioned 3 Sheldon farms. You just mentioned 2. Do you happen to know where the third is?
Oh, I think there were more than 3, really. They were, up and down Route 7. There were Sheldons on what's now Young's Road. So I can't say for sure. I'm told, too, that they had a sawmill about 2 miles down the road. There's a large ravine. Because Tanby is here tonight. So I think one of their daughters may have lived in your house. So. John?
Yes. The Daughters of the American Revolution, it said it was a chapter. Mm-hmm. Could you pronounce that name on that chapter? I was trying to.
I didn't. No. Probably better not try.
Yeah. I was just curious if it was a name of a city or town or.
That I don't know.
Yeah. It was, wow.
Yes.
Well, 2 things I thought about was, one, I wasn't sure I fully heard what you were saying about the time that he went from being an apprentice in Connecticut or in Rhode Island to being a captain of a ship. How long a period was that?
It was about a year. So.
And how did that happen?
Well, so that's not really expanded upon in here.
That's something. I mean, he must have been an impressive person to be trusted with a ship,
right?
When he had so little experience.
That's right, and it seems like his main connection to the sea was his father, who died just before he was born.
Right.
So
it also makes you wonder how much sea experience a captain really needed to have at that time. Was it more administrative than an actual seamanship?
I would think that growing up in a port town gave him some experience, but again, at about 14 years old, he began this apprenticeship, which would have been pretty intensive. That's my reading about these apprenticeships. Or that it was
6 years in the apprenticeship.
4 years.
4 years. So he would have been. You said 14.
From 14 to about 18 years.
So he'd been 18, and he becomes the captain of a ship
By
a year later.
19, yeah. Mm-hmm. Right.
That's one. The other thing I was thinking about is how little money that was that he left. Mm-hmm. I mean, it seems like he was pretty prosperous, given the house and land and all of that sort of thing.
That's right.
That's typical of that time to have so little cash if you are land.
Sure. And
working farm.
it was relatively common to be somewhat cash poor at the time, but looking at the way the house was, footprint of the house is 26 by 44 feet. It's 12 over 12 light windows throughout. There's really no, the exposed part of the foundation is quarried limestone, so I would say they spared no expense, really, in practical terms. So right, cash seemed to be around. Scott?
Would maybe, you had said that he held a mortgage for his son. Would maybe some of his cash been tied up with that purchase?
Very possibly, yes. So also further down in the will, too, I will say that aside from the $800 left to Eliza Ann, there was a bit more. I think it added up to about $2,500 more that he divided among his children, too. So.
Did he get the name Fighting Quaker merely because he was in the Merchant Marine? Did he actually see fighting?
Well, I think because of his imprisonment, his captivity during the war.
Okay.
Made him very much a veteran, so.
How rare was it for a Quaker to be in service like that?
Practically non-existent, so.
Because I'm having trouble figuring out
The way
how
I
he ended
understood
up
it, he
with that.
wasn't actually in service.
No, right, he was never enlisted in service. He never took up arms.
When you bought your place, did you know of Jonathan Sheldon's background as a cabinet maker?
Absolutely not, no. so when I read that part of the essay just about a year and a half ago, it was, nothing could be of greater interest to me, really. So,
I mean, the woodworking details in the house, though, did that make as much sense to you after you learned of his?
That stood out to me, of course. And the fact that practically every door, every Norfolk latch is still there was just impressive to me. I didn't know that I did know for sure at the time that it was likely within the same family for 140 years, which certainly would have helped with its preservation. And also, I will add, too, my conversations with Mrs. Munson after we bought the place, that when they were house hunting, they spent about 2 years looking for an old house that had not been, in her words, ruined or modernized to a great extent. So they looked from 1962 to 1964 for an old house, and then fortunately preserved it quite well, I would say. Then there was about 5 years where it was owned by George R. Lunn. This could all be just another talk, but George R. Lunn in 1913 became the mayor of Schenectady. And he has the distinction, too, of becoming the first registered socialist mayor of an American city. And that was 1913 in Schenectady. So Zoran Mamdani is not the first. He's a Democratic socialist. Actually, by the time George R. Lunn was lieutenant governor, he was a Democratic socialist himself. He had left the Socialist Party by that time. But in a biography of Lunn, I do read that George and Anita Lunn had kind of a hobby of buying old farms and restoring them to some extent. So I think there were a number of renovations, sort of sensitive renovations that were done between 42 and 47. The Lunns also wintered in California, so wood stoves that would have been added to the house were removed, the open hearths were refurbished, plasterwork was done. I would hypothesize, based on everything I can see in the walls of the house, that it was all wired at that time, too. Of course, Route 7 didn't get utility poles until 1935 to 7, at least out our part of Route 7. Quaker Street did not have electricity by the 1920s, but it took a bit longer by us. So I think at various points in the history of the farm, it's had some stewards with the awareness and the means to preserve things. We hope to keep that up.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
interestingly, I Googled Fighting Quaker. General Nathaniel Greene was... Oh, please. Leave this. Said Google. What a problem. Anyway, forgive me, and forgive my talkative talk. Nathaniel Greene was a fighting Quaker from Rhode Island. General Nathaniel Greene. So, anyway, as always, we have refreshments. Paul Marshman has provided those, and perhaps others. And Brenda. Thank you for coming. We have one more program. No, we don't have any more programs. We have one more gathering on December 15th for our annual Christmas party. So come and bring something to share. Not a gift, just something to eat. And we are just about, where's Carol? We're just about done putting together next year's programs. So you will see those posted when they're finalized on our website and probably on Facebook. And I'm always going to remind you that tell everyone we're on both DuanesburgHistory.com and Duanesburg Historical, historical.com. And we're also on Facebook. Anyway, thank you so much for coming, and enjoy the refreshment.